I'm Steve Taylor, originally from Birmingham but living in Wexford.
Nigel Davies, Chasewater, West Cornwall.
My name is Michael Caine. No, it's not. My name is Simon Phillips and I'm from Newport in South Wales.
Started doing it as a retail about 24 years ago, and it was just basically an extension of a hobby. I thought I was always into music, so I thought, see if I can make some money out of it.
I started some 27 years ago, largely by accident. I was moving house. I had to dispose of a very large collection that I'd accumulated because my new property wouldn't take it all, and I got such a lousy price from a dealer I approached that in future I vowed that if ever I was downsizing again I'd sell them for myself, and that's how I started.
Well, the motivation was that I've always loved music, I've always been into music. Started buying records as a kid with my pocket money in 1964 and just carried on. So as time goes on, you get older, and went through college like a lot of people sort of thing, and there was just a series of dead-end jobs strung out in front of me, and it was actually my brother-in-law said, well, why don't you start doing some mail order records? So I was like, yeah, okay. So we started doing a bit of that, and it developed into having a shop, and then the shop led on to doing record fairs, and that's why I'm sat in my fat ass here today talking to you.
Oh, terrible customers. Not mentioning any names. No, nothing really. No, it's a great gig if you like. You know, you're never in the same place. You know, sort of consecutively. You're doing venues sort of once every 2-3 months. You're meeting some great people like yourself. You know, which have become friends really. So. And it's a nice little circuit that we do. You know, the majority of the dealers are nice, and we all get on socially, and we've all known each other for years. So yeah, it's a great life.
I had only time to think of that because there have been very many. Initially, it's the sourcing of the stock is critical. You've got to have artists and titles that the public want. They also have to be in good enough condition that the public will pay for them. And then you have to sort of find your markets, which towns or cities have the greatest interest or throughput of people and collectors. Those are the basic issues you have to deal with when you're setting up in the business.
Poverty, hard work. It's, you know, I mean, it's like almost any job. If you're self-employed, you start off and it's unremitting hard work, and you just seem to be making no headway at all. As you go through it, sort of without even noticing, you just improve what you're doing without even knowing that you're improving it. And over a period of the 35 odd years I've been doing this, 35, nearly 40 years now, things have got a bit easier. But you know, trying to bring up a family sort of thing on some of the money that I was bringing home, like, you know, 30 years ago, was desperately hard work sort of thing. And it was really only because I was so into the music myself that made me continue. If it had just been a straight commercial decision, you know, whether this is how I want to earn a decent living for my family or not, I would have stopped. I say it was just, you know, the love of the music that kept me going really. So there you go.
Well, me personally, when I first started, it was just 100% vinyl, and you could see that the CDs were coming in, so I started going into CDs, obviously with the bootlegs and that. But then, as time went on, with the advent of CDRs and, like you say, downloading, people started downloading their own and making their own CDs. So, and this is about 10 years ago, I could see the back end falling out of CDs, and then I started going back to vinyl.
Well, there have been substantial changes in the music industry over the years. largely driven by, I'll say the American, but the multinational conglomerates, the major players in the industry. In the 60s and 70s, music was primarily, almost exclusively on vinyl. The quality of the vinyl decreased in the late 1970s as the industry tried to push the punter into buying cassettes, and since cassettes we have had CDs, mini discs, and now download.
Okay.
I can add to that, but I don't know whether it's appropriate, because I was going to say the technical side, that the download you only get the top and bottom, not the whole of the digital recording, and that's in my opinion why the 180 and 200 gram vinyl is making a recovery, because you get the whole of the recording.
Right, well, I mean, particularly like now at the moment, more and more bands take in more and more control of their output, which is great, but it makes my job slightly more difficult, because there are loads and loads of good bands out there that are putting out their own LPs, their own CDs, and then not putting them out through traditional methods of distribution. They're selling them themselves, either online or on a merch table at gigs, which is great for the bands. It's much better that they keep that economic control for themselves. But as somebody who would want some of those LPs and CDs on my stall, it makes it very hard to get them, because you have to deal with the bands direct, which is good. But there's thousands of bands, and if you have to deal with them all separately, it makes life very, very difficult. Whereas in the old days, something like Rough Trade would act as sort of like a gathering point, and all those bands would go to Rough Trade and say, look, here's 100 of our records or 200 of our records, you sell them, we'll come back in a month's time and sort it out. So that from my point of view then, all I had to do was just rock up to Rough Trade, you'd have all the records out on the shelves, just pull them out what you wanted, pay for them, you're gone, and that's great. So it's got slightly more complicated, but at the same time, as I said earlier, I'm glad that bands have now got a bit more control over their output. That's great.
Simon obviously ran his circuit of fairs in the UK when I lived over there, and when I started doing his fairs, that's how I met him.
Throughout the UK there are sort of regional sort of networks where promoters will move from town to town putting on events, and as a dealer you build up your own little circuit of towns where you sell successfully, and occasionally you rub shoulders with people from other circuits and you build up a network, which is very helpful if you're sourcing rarities, because when asked for something you may be able to ring somebody from a completely different area of the country and acquire something from one of your customers.
Well, I've known both those guys for quite a long time. Both of them at different times started turning up as dealers to fairs that I organised in the UK. Steve was the first, probably about in the early 90s, just as I was starting to develop my own circuit of record fairs in the UK. He was one of the guys that jumped on board as a dealer, sort of thing, and you know, we got friendly, he's a nice guy, sort of thing. He was always up for trying new fairs and going to new places, and you know, and that, so there was a sort of a social element to it as well. And then when I extended my fairs down to more of the southwest of the UK, down into Devon and Cornwall, which is where Nigel's from, and then he jumped on board sort of then as well. And yes, they're both still with me. Now I work for Steve over here because he lives over here, but Nigel still works for me, or not for me, with me when I'm down in the sort of southwest of England.
To start with Facebook, yeah, because you could do events that you'd pay for, and they were just whatever Facebook do with them. But I don't know, all of a sudden they've moved the goalposts, and it's like you can't have too much text in your ad, or you can't have too many pictures in your ad, and to be honest, excuse my language, but they're a pain in the arse.
In terms of sales, no. However, I do find that the internet is very helpful in checking archive material. Also, the use of Amazon and eBay to verify price levels for items where they aren't listed in reference books. By which I mean, if I come across an artist and title which doesn't appear in any reference books, I can Google it and see what it is and what the last one sold for.
I'm sort of a bit of an unintentional Luddite when it comes to things like that. I mean, I could still entirely run my business without any of that stuff. The main effect that sort of, you know, computers and emails and all that have had on me is a lot of my suppliers for new records now send out new release emails rather than new release sheets through the post.
Okay.
So I have to sit in front of the computer trolling through pages and pages of new release information instead of just having a little mini catalogue turning up every week or every 2 weeks. So for me, it hasn't made an awful lot of difference. I mean, I've got a web page that advertises my own record fairs, but I still prefer to do my advertising old school. You know, pace round rain-sodden dark streets, pasting up posters on empty shops and things like that. I still do that sort of stuff old school, and I still believe that works really effectively. Obviously, so I don't do stuff like Facebook and everything. I don't have time, to be honest. I don't really have the inclination to do it that way, because I work hard doing it the traditional way. It still works.